Hello, and welcome to our deep dive into one of the most divisive questions in modern British history. Did Brexit really give Britain back its sovereignty? The 2016 referendum, where 52% of voters chose to leave the EU, was sold on the promise of taking back control. But nearly a decade later, what does sovereignty mean in practice? Has Britain truly reclaimed its independence? Or is the reality more complex? In this video, we'll unpack the concept of sovereignty, explore how Brexit has reshaped Britain's ability to make its own laws, control its borders, and trade freely, and question whether the promises made have been delivered. We'll break it down into 10 key points, grounded in facts and analysis, to give you a clear picture, whether you're a Brexiteer, Remainer, or just curious. Stick with us as we cut through the noise and get to the truth. Let's dive in. First, let's define sovereignty. It's the ability of a nation to govern itself without external interference. For Brexit supporters, this meant escaping EU laws, courts, and regulations. Pre-Brexit, the EU's Court of Justice had final say on disputes involving EU law, which applied across member states including the UK. Brexit promised to restore parliamentary sovereignty, where Westminster alone makes and enforces laws. Post-2020, the UK no longer answers to the EU Court, and Parliament can pass laws without EU approval. For example, the UK banned live animal exports for slaughter in 2021, something EU rules restricted. But sovereignty isn't absolute. Trade deals, like the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement, impose obligations. If the UK diverges too far from EU standards, it risks tariffs or reduced market access. So, while Brexit restored legal sovereignty, global trade and treaties still limit total independence. Has Britain truly taken back control, or just swapped one set of constraints for another? Brexit's core promise was control over laws. Pre-Brexit, the UK adopted thousands of EU regulations, from environmental standards to consumer protections. After leaving, the UK passed the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018, retaining EU laws but allowing Parliament to amend or repeal them. Changes include scrapping EU VAT rules on sanitary products in 2021 and easing gene editing laws for crops. Yet, many EU laws remain, as divergence can disrupt trade. For instance, Northern Ireland still follows some EU rules under the Windsor Framework to avoid a hard border with Ireland. Critics argue this limits sovereignty, as parts of the UK are tied to EU standards without a say. Supporters counter that Westminster's ability to change laws, even gradually, is a win. The catch: diverging risks economic fallout, as the EU is the UK's largest trading partner. So, while Britain can make its own laws, economic realities often dictate alignment with Brussels. Brexit was meant to free Britain to strike its own trade deals. As an EU member, the UK was bound by the EU's common commercial policy. Post-Brexit, the UK has signed deals with countries like Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. By 2025, the UK has 70 trade agreements, covering £900 billion in trade annually. But the EU remains the UK's biggest market, accounting for 42% of exports in 2024. The UK-EU trade agreement avoids tariffs, but introduces non-tariff barriers, like customs checks, increasing costs for businesses. UK agri-food exports dropped 21% post-Brexit due to red tape. While the UK can negotiate deals, many replicate EU terms to maintain access. Critics say this isn't true autonomy, as the EU's market size forces alignment. Supporters highlight new Pacific Trade Bloc memberships, like CPTPP's wins. Still, trade sovereignty comes with trade-offs. New deals haven't yet offset EU market losses. Immigration was a flashpoint in the Brexit debate. The EU's free movement meant EU citizens could live and work in the UK without visas. Post-Brexit, the UK introduced a points-based immigration system in 2021, treating EU and non-EU citizens equally, except Irish citizens. This gave the UK control over who enters for work or study. Non-EU immigration has risen, with 300,000 work visas issued in 2024, mainly in health and care. But illegal migration, like channel crossings, remains a challenge. With 30,000 arrivals in Brexit allowed the UK to set its own rules, but global migration pressures persist. The EU's influence lingers too. Northern Ireland's open border requires alignment with some EU migration rules. Supporters say Brexit delivered border control. Critics argue it's incomplete, as economic needs and international obligations limit total control. Has Brexit really secured Britain's borders, or just changed the challenges? The Leave campaign's £350 million weekly EU contribution claim was iconic. The real figure, net of rebates, was closer to £200 million a week. Post-Brexit, the UK no longer pays into the EU budget, saving an estimated £10 billion annually by 2025. This money has been redirected to domestic priorities like the NHS, with £5 billion extra allocated in 2024. But Brexit introduced new costs. Customs administration and lost trade revenue cost £7 billion yearly per OBR estimates. The UK also paid a £36 billion divorce bill to settle EU obligations. Critics argue these costs offset savings, while supporters say ending contributions restored fiscal sovereignty. Yet, new trade barriers and EU alignment needs, like the 2025 ETA scheme costing £16 per traveller, add financial burdens. So while Britain controls its budget, economic realities mean sovereignty doesn't always equal savings. Is this the financial freedom promised? Northern Ireland is Brexit's biggest sovereignty sticking point. To avoid a hard border with Ireland, the Northern Ireland Protocol, later Windsor Framework, keeps NI partially aligned with EU rules, overseen by the EU court in some cases. Goods moving from Great Britain to NI face checks, causing friction. In 2024, 41% of NI businesses reported trade disruptions. Brexiteers argue this undermines UK sovereignty, as NI doesn't fully follow Westminster's laws. The UK government insists the framework protects the Union, while respecting the Good Friday Agreement. Remainers say it shows sovereignty's limits. Global agreements, like those with Ireland and the EU, restrict total control. Recent UK-EU deals, like the 2025 Strategic Partnership, ease some checks, but NI's unique status persists. Supporters see pragmatic compromise. Critics see a divided UK. Does this hybrid arrangement honour the Brexit promise of sovereignty, or fracture it? Brexit was pitched as making Britain a global player, free from EU constraints. The UK now sets its own foreign policy and trade terms, joining blocs like the CPTPP in 2024. It's also forged security pacts, like AUKUS, independently. But the EU amplified the UK's voice pre-Brexit. Britain shaped EU policies affecting 27 nations. In 2025, the UK's absence from EU talks on issues like Ukraine or climate goals limits its influence. The EU's market power means alignment often persists, as seen in emissions trading agreements. Critics argue Brexit reduced Britain's global clout, with London's financial hub losing 7,000 jobs to EU cities by 2024. Supporters say new deals and flexibility outweigh losses. Sovereignty here means freedom to act alone, but the EU's size and proximity still shape UK choices. Has Brexit made Britain a global leader, or a smaller player on the world stage? Brexit promised freedom from EU red tape. The EU's 80,000 pages of regulations governed everything from food safety to banking. Post-Brexit, the UK can set its own standards. In 2024, it eased rules on chemical approvals and relaxed banker bonus caps, moves impossible under EU law. But divergence is tricky. 80% of UK businesses still trade with the EU, and misalignment risks losing market access. For example, UK carmakers align with EU emissions standards to avoid export barriers. The 2025 UK-EU strategic partnership encourages regulatory cooperation, limiting divergence. Critics say this binds the UK to EU-like rules without a vote. Supporters argue it's pragmatic sovereignty. The UK's ability to innovate, like in AI regulation, is a win. But full regulatory freedom remains elusive due to economic ties. Does this deliver the deregulation Brexiteers dreamed of, or just a new kind of constraint? How do Brits view Brexit's sovereignty promise? Polls in 2025 show 55% believe Brexit hasn't delivered as promised, with only 30% feeling the UK is more sovereign. Many cite trade disruptions and NI issues as evidence of limited control, yet 40% value the ability to make national laws, like on fishing quotas, up 10% since 2020. The Leave campaign's Take Back Control resonated with voters feeling Brussels overruled British values. But economic challenges, 4% GDP loss by 2024 per OBR, have soured some. Remainers argue sovereignty was never lost, as the UK shaped EU laws. Brexiteers insist parliamentary control is worth it, despite trade-offs. Public division reflects the complexity. Legal sovereignty is clearer, but economic and political sovereignty feels murkier. Has Brexit unified Britain under a shared sense of control, or deepened divides over what sovereignty means? What does Brexit mean for sovereignty long-term? Legally, the UK has more control. Westminster can pass laws without EU oversight. But global realities, like trade dependence and international treaties, limit absolute sovereignty. The EU's 2025 ETS scheme and UK's ETA show mutual restrictions persist. Northern Ireland's status may fuel constitutional debates, with 60% of Scots favouring EU rejoining in 2024 polls. Economically, Brexit's impact, £100 billion annual trade loss per CBI, suggests sovereignty comes at a cost. Yet, new trade deals and regulatory flexibility could yield benefits by 2030, like AI leadership. Critics warn of reduced global influence. Supporters see a nimble UK forging its path. The question is whether sovereignty translates to prosperity and unity, or ongoing friction. Will future generations see Brexit as a bold reclaiming of control, or a costly illusion? And there you have it, 10 key points, unpacking whether Brexit truly gave Britain back its sovereignty, from laws and trade to borders and global influence. The picture is mixed. Brexit delivered legal control, but economic and political realities show sovereignty isn't absolute. Northern Ireland, trade barriers, and public division highlight the trade-offs. Yet, new trade deals and regulatory freedoms offer potential. Whether you see Brexit as a triumph or a misstep, the debate continues to shape Britain's future. What do you think? Has Brexit delivered the control promised, or is it a work in progress? Drop your thoughts in the comments, like and subscribe for more deep dives into the issues that matter. If you want to explore further, check out our sources in the description for the latest data and analysis. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time for another big question.